Brilliant. Good evening, everyone, and welcome to tonight's Children and Education Policy and Accountability Committee. I'm Councillor Helen Rowbottom, and I am the chair. And before we start, just have a few housekeeping points. So obviously tonight's meeting is being held remotely, and that means it's an informal meeting. So topics are for consideration or discussion rather than for decision making. And it was being live streamed to the council's YouTube channel. So by participating, you are consenting to being recorded. For the benefit of people watching online, whenever people do speak, even to ask a question, just make sure you introduce yourself before speaking for the first time. Item 1, apologies for absence. I've just had an apology for joining a little bit late from Councillor Ume. Otherwise, I think we have the full complement tonight. Item number 2, declarations of interest. Do members have any declarations they'd like to make? I'm going to take silence as no. So item 3, the minutes. Do members agree the minutes of the meeting held on the 29th of January this year as an accurate record? I'm seeing thumbs up. Okay, and I'm going to take, can I just have an agree just for the record, anyone?
Agreed. I don't know if I
Thank you very much.
Anyway,
agreed.
Thank you. Lovely. And we have got a very busy agenda, so I'm going to move straight to it and invite Peter to speak to the education performance data item, which is item 4. So Peter is our operational director for education and SEND. So over to you, Peter.
Thanks, Councillor Rowbottom. So I'm assuming people have had an opportunity to read through the kind of the paper with all of the results and the kind of text, etc. So I've prepared just a short PowerPoint just to run you through some of the highlights. So I'm now going to probably spectacularly fail to share my screen. I do apologise in advance because I've not done this via. So sorry, give me 1 second. Sorry. I don't know if I'm going to be able to do it. I can't work it out. I'm over here now. Sorry.
Don't worry at all. Debbie, are you familiar with this? Could you advise Peter or perhaps share on his behalf?
I can talk us through it if we need to. Peter, when you click on share screen at the bottom, It's got that. And then it should be a pop-up box that should give you various...
yeah, I've got it. Sorry, I couldn't find the document. That was the problem.
Fine.
Is that working?
Yes.
Yeah, perfect. Great. Got it. Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, so I can't see anybody now, but hopefully we should be fine. So this is just running you through the Education and Performance Report for academic year 22-23. So just so that if people remember, the results come out after they've been formalised in January. So it does take some time for the kind of national statistics and national results to come out. And then some of the census data, which gives us information about attendance and exclusions, etc. Also relates to only the autumn and spring of 22-23. So we do have sort of issues in terms of legacy data and so on. And it's probably the last time we probably need to mention this, but it's also important to note that some of the results do have some legacy issues in terms of COVID, because if you remember rightly, there was only results in 2019, then there was no results in 2020 or 2021. Therefore, the results from 22-23 were also, 21-22 were also affected. So these are the first kind of unaffected results for quite some time. So it's worth bearing in mind that actual facts. So I'm going to start with the lowest academic years and then move forward. So the first year that we're looking at is our early years, and this is measured as a good level of development across the different range of early years foundation kind of metrics. And as you can see here, the grading at early years has actually changed, not anything to do with COVID, but just due to a change in the framework, which saw quite a significant decrease from the pre-2021 levels down to the performance where we see now. And as you can see at the moment, the performance in H&F is slightly below the national average, and that's something that's obviously a key focus for our early years providers moving forward. So GLD, as you'll see from the slide, is a good level of development. It's the measure of attainment at the end of early years before year one. In the second point is around the stage in terms of phonics, and that you can see here that you've got a similar type trend in terms of phonics, in terms of the information that's available. So the phonics results have also seen a dip nationally between 2019 and 2022, and you can see that the performance in H&F is very much matching that of the early years performance. In Key Stage 2, you can see that there is a significant improvement in our results, and you can see that H&F performance is well above the national average for both expected progress and also greater depth. This is obviously something that we're very proud of in terms of our primary schools and the performance of the young people at the end of their year 6, at the end of Key Stage 2. This measures the attainment, which is the academic standard that pupils reach at the end of Key Stage 2, and it's recorded by a scale score at this point. The next slide looks at progress, and as you can see here, progress in H&F has been strong and has remained strong and has actually really improved in 2023. So you can see that in 2022 we were above average for reading, writing and maths, and you can see that we're in 2023 the progress has increased even more above national average, which is that small grey bar at the bottom. And you can see that both for reading, writing and significantly for maths, we're now well above the national average, which is obviously a really positive improvement and something that we're very, very proud of. At Key Stage 4, we can also see from the two key measures, which are Progress 8, which measures the kind of overall progress that a child makes, a pupil makes between primary school and the end of GCSE, and the Attainment Weight 8, which is the kind of the achievement that they make, that compared to the national average, we're significantly above in across the average of all of our Hammersmith and Fulham schools. So our Progress 8 sits at 0.46, which means that on average, the young people make half a grade across all of their subjects compared to their national peers, which is very, very positive. And our Attainment 8 is 54.6 compared to a national average of 46.2. And it's the Attainment 8 that eventually will create the Progress 8. So we're very, very proud of our performance at Key Stage 2 and Key Stage 4, as you can see from these results and the excellent work that our schools are doing. The other pieces of information that are shared nationally are the grade 5s in terms of English and maths. So you can see here that the performance at Hammersmith and Fulham is 61.2%, which is well above the national of 45%. And the EBAC entry, which is the number of young people that enter the EBAC and take an equivalent of GCSE in English, maths, science, languages and humanities, which again, as you can see, is well above the national average of 39, with the Hammersmith and Fulham schools scoring an achievement of 67.6. When we presented these results last year, there was a bit of some questions and some information about our SEND performance. So I've included some additional detail which shows the performance of our SEND performance in terms of Key Stage 2. You can see that in 21, 22, and then 22, 23, we are well above the national average for our performance of the percent of our young people with EHCPs achieving the expected standard. And similarly, for our young people who are on SEN support, we are again well above the expected standard in terms of the UK performance. So you can see there in 21-22 we were at 36% compared to 21% nationally, and in 22-23 we have moved to 42.8% compared to 23% nationally. So you can see there that, again, the performance of our young people with both EHCPs and SEND support is well above the national average, which is something, again, we can be very proud of. Then we look at the performance of our young people with SEND across Key Stage 4. And again, you'll see from these results that we've got a very positive picture. So as you would probably expect, our percentage of pupils with EHCs achieving 9 to 4 is slightly lower than the national average. This is partly down to the number of special schools that we have in Hammersmith and Fulham, amongst some other things, whereas our performance with SEN support is way above. So you can see nationally it's 20%, and ours is just over 40. So you can see that's a very positive improvement. The attainment 8, again, is ever so slightly lower for those with EHCPs, whereas for SEN support, it's significantly higher. Whereas our progress score for EHCs, although it's -1, that compares to -1.12 nationally. So again, it's just slightly better than the national. Whereas our progress 8 score for pupils with SEND support is significantly above the national average, whereas the national average for those with SEND support is significantly below, where you've got -0.45. So I would say about that point there, it's quite rare to have performance of SEND support above 0, and as you can see, ours is quite significantly above at nearly 1/5 of a grade. The next section to just talk through briefly is around Key Stage 5 performance. So you can see that the APS for Key Stage 5 for A-level is above the national average. So in Hammersmith and Fulham, the average point score was 36 compared to 34. That translates to an average grade of B- versus C+. And in Bursey, in our vocational is actually slightly lower. So that's 25.84, which is equivalent of a pass plus compared to national, which is 29.51, which is down to merit plus. So that's something that we were looking to interrogate slightly more moving forward. I'm then going to talk briefly around attendance and also exclusions. So you can see the attendance data here is proving a real challenge nationally. And this compares in terms of sort of pre-COVID, where it was about 94-95% nationally. You can see in Hammersmith and Fulham, we've seen a slight dip in our attendance from 93.2 to 92.7. That's something that's not quite the same nationally, although we're slightly above still, because the national average is 92.5 and 92.6. Whereas we've also seen a slight increase in our number of persistent absences. That's the number of young people who are missing over 10% of school on average across the year. And you can see there that we've got 20.1% of people as it was in 21-22 compared to 22-23 compared to 22-23, we've got 21.6. So that has increased slightly. So that's something that's very much on our minds at the moment as a kind of key area of focus moving forward. The final slide I've got before I'll pause and take any questions is looking at exclusions. So the exclusion rate in Hammersmith and Fulham has tended to be very low, at around 0.01%, 0.02%, which is the equivalent of 2 permanent.
I think, Peter, if you can still hear us, it's just frozen for me. I'm not sure if that's the same for others.
Our suspension rate 9.6 nationally. So I'm going to stop sharing.
Debbie, do you mind just corroborating? Is that my Wi-Fi, or is that Peter's? Did just snarl up a little bit at the end of the presentation there?
I think it was Peter's. So Peter, we didn't get the very end of that last slide.
My apologies. Is that the exclusion data?
Yeah.
Sorry. So what I was explaining on the exclusion data was that Whereas nationally, there's been a significant increase in the suspension rate from 2.36 to 2.96. Although we've seen an increase in Hammersmith and Fulham also, it's not been of the same extent. So our exclusion rate is now well below, or suspension rate, sorry, is now well below the national average at 1.73. Bearing in mind, as I said, this is the data from autumn term 22-23. So there is some kind of legacy issues which exist there. So we've got some information to talk through in terms of the virtual school and so on, but I thought it probably best just to stop there and get any questions from anybody.
Okay, thank you. So we've got a bit on virtual school pending, but we'll go to some questions, and I have one to kickstart. I can't see anyone's hands up yet, so I will take the chair's privilege. And I just wondered if you could, I know it's a small point, Peter, but could you briefly outline the difference in the early years foundation stage frameworks, just to talk about what the change was and why? I don't know whether nationally people generally been judged harsher, but why that did.
Yeah, I might have to pass to Georgina if that's okay. It's not absolutely her area of expertise in terms of early years, but Georgina, I think essentially the framework was made more rigorous for some of the kind of key areas in terms of good level of development. Does that summarise? It wasn't a specific change; it was more in terms of implementation.
Yeah, it's probably a good way to summarise it. So there were some changes in terms of the areas, but the sort of key elements are around just the sharpening of the focus, being really clear about the sort of outcomes, delineating some of the sort of areas as well. So looking at when you look at number, just making it really clear about what's being assessed around that area of need. Potentially, is the kind of the focus. There was a sort of comprehensive training session that was run out by the DfE. So all the sort of our nursery sector, our early years sector were sort of upskilled in terms of the changes. And then the framework was sort of introduced within the area. And the schools and settings have been using that ever since 2021, really.
And Georgina, could you talk just a little bit about what was the rationale? What was the DfE trying to capture in the revised framework?
Absolutely. So I think there was reflection from practitioners and reflection from settings across the piece. There was also a sense of looking at the sort of GLD outcomes and looking at where the differences were coming about with regards to some of the key areas, such as just some of the areas such as understanding of the world. So effectively, there was a real sort of push from the sector to sort of explore and to really sort of dig deep into some of the finer points around the earliest foundation stage. So I think that was a big push that supported the change. It really is a feedback from practitioners.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Richardson, I see you have your hand up.
Yes, I have. I just wanted to do some clarification really between with the primary schools. You've got a split between academies and community primaries, and with the secondary schools, they're mainly academies now in Hammersmith and Fulham. Do we ever look at the figures of the differences between those primary schools? Is that ever taken into consideration? And in terms of the things like attendance and exclusions, what can we actually do as a council with if one of the to help with attendance with the academies? What's our actual remit?
Two very good questions. So we don't necessarily look at the results as a whole of maintained schools versus as a whole of kind of voluntary aided, or as a whole in terms of academies. And what we would obviously do is look at the results individually for each individual schools, and those that sit within our responsibility specifically, we would obviously look to provide necessary support based on the information that's telling us. So Georgina and the team, if we identify a specific issue and say, let's do something, for example, in terms of maths, in terms of progress with a particular school, then we would target our support and our kind of consultants and Georgina's team in that direction. Academies can buy into the service as well. So we do run the learning partnership, which offers all of the CPD for our primary schools. And we have had a couple of our academies that have joined us as part of that. And that's been a really positive for them and has really supported them with their Ofsted inspections, for example. And I think is one of the significant reasons why our results are really strong, especially at Key Stage 2. So in terms of attendance and exclusions, I'll take the two things separately because they are very different. Most of the exclusions and suspensions do tend to sit in secondary schools. It's kind of around 86% nationally that sit within secondary schools. That is very much come up to them in terms of the provision that they provide and the decisions that they make. So as you'll be aware from the DfE exclusion guidance and policy, is the head teacher is the only person who can make a decision about an exclusion or a suspension. However, what we do provide is quite a robust SEMH outreach offer, so social, emotional, mental health outreach offer, which sits within the OAT alternative provision. So Ormiston provide that for us in terms of an offer which sits there that schools can use and kind of not have necessarily is available for them to use to support with either wider behaviour system changes or also individual support for individual young people that are perhaps at risk or finding school a particular challenge. And we would also use our Inspire service to support with that as well. So the Inspire team work mainly focused on SEND, but can also be allocated out to support people if potentially there's undiagnosed need, for example, that may support a school with that particular child or particular way of working that can support them. And then similarly, we can use our education psychologist team to also support schools. So it tends to be with academies that we would be invited in rather than kind of pushing ourselves through the door, for want of a better description. But if we do see kind of trends, etc., within the data, is something that our academies are very open to the conversation and open to the support. And I think genuinely, I don't know if it's necessarily luck, but I think we have a very positive relationship with all of our academies. So, for example, I think the last 3 head teachers meetings, we've had practically everyone there. So I think actually the last meeting, even though it was in person, we had full attendance from all of the schools, which was really, really positive.
I'm sure that's down to hard work rather than luck.
Well, I didn't want to say. I think there's an element. I think there's an element.
I think that's a real achievement.
Yeah, there's an element of longevity here, and kind of us having a strong working relationship with them, listening and providing the kind of evidence and support that we would like. Attendance is again a real challenge and is a real focus for us, and something that we really need to think through internally. So the DfE have put together very specific statutory guidance, which is likely, we believe, to become statutory in September. It was kind of brought in as advisory guidance previously. We've worked within that guidance and worked with a DfE advisor as to what we can provide to support schools. We have a kind of split in terms of provision. So we would obviously support the schools with early help and family support where that's kind of targeted. Also, we support them with things like penalty notices and all of those sorts of things that sit within the guidance. We would like to do more with that, and that's something that we're looking at internally. Jackie, Amena and I have been having conversations about how we kind of support schools more with that, because we're kind of keenly aware that it's a key area for improvement that we would like to see.
Excellent. And just one more follow-up. Do you have a way of mapping the effectiveness of the interventions, things like Inspire and the alternative?
Yes. So with Inspire, it's not binary, but what we look at is we look at so for example, it's more towards SEN, but what we would look at is where we're getting large amounts of applications for EHCPs or ECNAs, and whether that school has engaged with the service. So for example, if we're seeing a significant amount of applications for, say, EHCPs or education healthcare plans, sorry, with autism, and the school hasn't engaged the Inspire autism team, then we would ask the team to have a conversation with that school about whether that's something perhaps that would be really beneficial. And similarly, if we're seeing a large number of applications for young people with speech and language, and they've not engaged with the joint communication team, and again we would have a conversation with them and look at what's going on there. Georgina and the team look at the exclusion data and the suspension data, and they will kind of look and support the school if they're seeing a high number of suspensions coming through. We'll then kind of maybe, let's just say, be a little bit more directed as to whether a behaviour review might be beneficial.
Okay, thank you. And what's the current waiting time for the Inspire service and the Ed Psych?
I couldn't tell you, I'm afraid. I'm so sorry. I don't.
No, I'd be interested to hear.
We tried to be quite responsive in terms of what we would do. So, Georgina, I'm going to put you on the spot here, but if we're getting, it shouldn't be more than a couple of weeks.
No, we aim to be very responsive. So typically, schools can refer into Inspire. They refer into their EP. They've got allocated educational psychologists. So if there is a need that comes up, the school will work with the EP service or work with the Inspire team in terms of the allocation of that support. But they aim to be very responsive. It's the same with our OAT, so the AP team, the outreach team that's supporting around SEMH needs and behaviour in the local area, and they are very responsive. So they aim to at least make contact with the school, whether it be by telephone or email, as quickly as possible.
Thank you very much.
Great, thank you very much. And I'll move to, I think sequentially, Nandini was next.
Thank you, Chair. I'm trying to frame this question right, but how do you actually calculate need, especially when you are also considering pupils with EHCP, pupils on SEN support, etc.? How do you actually calculate need? Because people with EHCPs go up to 25, they may move on to other things, or you may not know at all what they are doing if they lose their education healthcare plan. So I'm just wondering how that is calculated, or how do you track need?
The NEETs, so the NEETs are the not in employment education training. Is that the ones you mean, Andy?
Yeah, not in education employment training. Sorry.
That's okay. There's no problem. Thank you. Councillor Saunders made sure I kind of had to spell out all of the acronyms that are in this presentation because there's so many. So the way we do that is somebody in Georgina's team works with an external company. It all runs from the census and from the young person's unique learner number. And that gives us, it doesn't matter whether they have an EHCP or whether they lose the EHCP. What it actually will do is it will track two things. It will track whether they're not in employment education training, which tells us that they're definitely not in something, or it will also add in those that are unknown. And when we get the information through in a sort of kind of November, December time, the team then spend a significant amount of time going through the NEET list to see whether we can get them into different programs that are available. That can be a real challenge because very few education programs and employment programs start in January. And that's something that we're looking to try to unpick a little bit further. We do have some programs that can support people, for example, the SPEAR program, but we also know that we can do with a few other examples as well. We do, for example, we can use QPR in terms of mentoring as another idea. But what we then do is really go through those that are unknown. We often find with the unknowns, a lot of those have maybe gone to a private sixth form. Some of them will have moved abroad. And some of them will have moved out of area. So it takes quite a lot of unpicking for Georgina's team to get to the bottom of where those unknowns actually are. I think, Georgina, off the top of my head, we've got down to around 45 this year, haven't we, compared to what was slightly higher previously?
So there's definitely been some significant work in terms of tracking the pupils and ensuring that there's destinations for the pupils. The LA advisor in the team that focuses on that area does a number of preventative things as well. So he coordinates a careers network for secondary schools, which is well attended, so which signposts schools and gives them support around what we call the September guarantee, which is just making sure that pupils have a destination for the following September on leaving school. We also, with the advisor, they because the database that is used can track pupils across the country. So essentially, it means that even if pupils move out of the area, we can still track in terms of their destinations and the placements they've gone on to. And then they also work with a variety of teams internally as well. So the LA advisor works with our SEND team and the coordinators there. They work with the Youth Justice Service and a number of different professionals internally as well, just to make sure that the information is joined up and that there is a coordinated approach with regards to tracking the young people.
Thank you very much, Councillor Afzal Khan.
Thank you. My question was about the persistent absence, and I was wondering what the council can do, what the department can do to intervene with this, and if we have any breakdown of figures in terms of whether this persistent absence is more in the maintained schools or more in the academies, the multi-academies, and to what extent can the council intervene in this matter?
So in terms of intervening, the first kind of key group is the school, and that's absolutely categoric in the DfE guidance as well. If you look through that, I created an audit tool for schools that actually runs to 9 pages as to the activities they should be completing around attendance. So it's a significant piece of work and a significant job for the school to focus on. We do have information on every school. I won't share that in this meeting. And that is something that enables us to target our work. So we have we have a one kind of school attendance officer that works with specific schools, and we target that person to support with that particular kind of where we see particular areas of concern, specifically within our maintained schools if we can, but that won't be precluded to that. We'll also use that with academies as well. We have a second person that works with some of our secondaries as well. So we have one person working with the primaries and one person working with the secondaries, because we do see that there is a significantly greater problem in the secondaries than the primaries, and that's something that is the same nationally. The other thing that we're doing is making sure that our data is really up to date and really current. So we're working with a new program to support us to look at the attendance, which gives us live feeds on a day-to-day basis in terms of attendance and also suspensions and exclusions as well, which is enabling us to think through how our services can be developed moving forward so we can support schools as much as possible with this particular issue.
Thank you.
Thank you. Did you have any follow-up questions, Councillor Afzal Khan, or? Okay, all right. I think just the lower hand and also another function. Oh yes, share to unshare. Yes, you've done it. Brilliant. Thank you very much, Peter. Okay, I'm just had a final, unless there's any other questions which I can't see. I just wanted to kind of zoom out and Peter perhaps ask if you to focus on the next educational year. This is obviously an overview of lots of different stats. Where would you say the focus is for the coming educational year?
I think the key for us is to continue the focus with our primary schools, supporting them in particular in terms of early years and the development of that, and making sure that the data can improve and remain strong. And I think then we've been pretty clear that the other focus is on attendance and exclusions and suspensions, and supporting schools with what we know is proving to be a challenge there.
Okay, great. And do you foresee any particular, are there particular things that will inhibit your kind of ability to change that, or particular factors to bear in mind? It could be staffing or finding.
Yes, so in terms of attendance, it would be a significant funding input from the DfE would be great for all local councils, because we've been given large amounts of statutory responsibilities and there's been no funding that's followed that. So where you would potentially be looking to have upwards in the size of Hammersmith and Fulham, upwards of sort of 6 to 8 staff focused on this. We don't have that resource.
Understood. And I think for me, I think with the context of how, what we look at to stagger progress is the last few years, and given the changes and the context of things like the pandemic, it would be interesting to see how we can control for that, but also not let any interesting data get lost in that as well. I'm sure that's a balance you're constantly having to make. I've got two other questions. So Councillor Richardson first, and then Councillor Sanderson.
Yeah, just quickly, with regards to follow up about exclusions. So do we still have, where do physically people who are excluded go to? Do we still have TBAT, or has that been replaced by Ormiston, or am I getting the two complicated and mixed up?
That's completely correct. So Ormiston took over what was TBAT, or the bridge, and the other provisions a few years ago, and they are our commissioned alternative provision provider, and they so we work with them. So any young person that is permanently excluded, that information comes through to Liz's team, which is the ACE team, and they will make a referral to Ormiston within 6 days, and we've got 100% record of getting those referrals through and making sure that a child is placed and in school. Okay, and whereabouts are they actually based? Are they in the same place as the bridge used to be? Yeah, so it is in the same place. However, it's undergone a significant redevelopment, which was funded, I think, by central government or by Ormiston themselves. I'm not sure exactly. So at the moment, they have half completed a significant rebuild, and they're just moving across to that other half. I think as we speak, actually, I've had a chance to visit the new side, but not with the young people in it. And then they're going to be redeveloping the other half. Excellent. And as it's a commission, we commission that service. So how do we monitor the results of that? So we monitor the results very, very carefully. So we look at all of the kind of key metrics that sit there. So we run a specific attendance focus group with them, because there is a concern in terms of attendance at alternative provision. And we have quite a rigorous process around that. And Georgina is a member of the School Improvement Board and would work with them in terms of quality assurance, looking at the data, doing learning walks, and that sort of thing. Okay, excellent. Thank you.
Great, thank you. Councillor Sanderson.
Thank you, Chair. Just to echo what's been said, we're very, very lucky. We've got a complex education landscape across Hammersmith and Fulham, where all of our secondaries are academies. We've got, in our primaries, about a third are maintained, third voluntary aided, third are academies again. And it's really testament to the team that we've got such a brilliant relationship with the schools and the school community, which means that we can influence and manage some of the really challenging policy issues that have been pushed onto us without funding, like attendance. I think the stat is something like 1.8 million children are missing a day of school a fortnight across the UK. So it's certainly not a Hammersmith and Fulham issue. It is a national issue, which the DoD have asked us to now deal with without matching any of the funding. I think Peter has been very diplomatic in saying that we haven't quite got enough resource. I think that is really underselling where we are. We need a lot more resource. It's made worse by falling roles. But the number one thing that the government could do would be to fund education properly. So I think that's one of the big challenges for the year ahead. But thank you.
Noted, thank you. Any other contributions before I just ask generally for us to note the items? Nandini.
You carried out your self-sufficiency review last year, didn't you, Peter? And you came out for consultation, and Parents Active also contributed to that. Have you started implementing it? Because it was a long-term plan, I think until 2028, wasn't it, from the top of my head? Have you started implementing? How is that progressing?
So that is progressing very nicely. So we have just been in the process of collecting in the bids from our schools for I'm going to roll back 2 points. So the first thing that we've done is work with all of our present special schools and providers to make sure that the provisions and the kind of the the different requirements for each school are really, really clear. That was the first kind of recommendation that sat within the SEND sufficiency. We've looked at what's required in terms of special schools, in terms of the number of young people, number of places, etc., that we commission, and making sure that that's clear. We've then done some regularisation of the units that exist already, for example, at Queen's Manor, John the 23rd, etc. And then we are now in the process of, we've collected a number of bids from schools for setting up additional resource bases and units, both from secondaries and primaries, specifically focused on autism and speech and language. We're assessing those bids as we speak, and we expect to be informing the winning providers, shall we say, just after Easter. And then we will start on the implementation of those. If they're in maintained schools, we might be able to move them through quite quickly, potentially even for September, in quite small scale. But the main launch will be from September 2025.
Are residents involved in evaluating the bids?
Not really, Nandini. It's not even me.
Technical.
It's the people that have really focused in on the SEND provision and on the looking at the kind of resourcing and the kind of buildings and those sorts of things, so that we can make sure that can work really well.
Okay, fair enough. Thanks, Peter.
Okay, any further questions?
Chair, I'm conscious of time. Do you want me to cover off? I know we spoke quite a lot of detail about the virtual school in the last meeting and a couple of other things, but obviously the report does kind of cover off some of those areas already. So I don't know if you want me to go through any key bits.
I would, and I had one final question. Sorry, that's just occurred to me around. Actually, no, you carry on, Peter. You go ahead with that. Absolutely, I'll hold.
Okay, so no problem. So if I refer you to the actual report itself on section 15. The reason I didn't put this onto slides or specifically graphs, and I think we spoke about this in the previous meeting, is the virtual school data really doesn't lend itself to kind of comparisons across cohorts and years, because obviously the number of children that sit within the virtual schools and their kind of specific need, etc., it is very much down to the individual, and that's very much how the kind of school operates to support with that. But there are some really kind of positive performance that exists. So as you'll note from the report, there's 213 children and young people on the virtual school roll. Very small number in early years, the vast majority, 131 in reception to year 11, and then 76 that are in post 16. We don't have any kind of comparable data at the moment. That will hopefully come out shortly, but you can see here the performance of our kind of expected standards in reading, writing, maths and science. We expect to be pretty comparable to national kind of children looked after data, and we're sure that our young people are performing very positively. In terms of Key Stage 2, there was 8 children that reached the kind of end of Key Stage 2, which is why, as I said, it's not really kind of comparable in terms of graphs and tables and so on. And we saw a very positive performance here, especially was in reading, where 75% of the children achieved the expected standard, which is very, very positive. And you've got the kind of data there in section 15. In terms of Key Stage 4, there was 13 young people that came.
Just had you dip out briefly, yeah. Peter. We had you from 2024, and then it lost you briefly.
Cohorts, and there was a very wide name too, attending special days. The end of Key Stage 4, we had 13 young people in terms of their educational career, and it had. Oh, hello. If I keep
Peter,
dropping out, sorry.
We caught, I think, the second half of that. We had a bit missing in the middle. You were sort of so I can remember it started with 2024, but that's probably not so precise. Okay. But we left a few sentences. Don't worry.
So I think am I on key? Did you catch the point where I'm up to Key Stage 4? Sorry.
I think we were just going on to that, unless I was mistaken. Yeah. But literally just a few sentences.
No worries, sorry about that. So Key Stage 4, we had 13 young people that were meeting the end of Key Stage 4, and quite a large number of those have got EHCPs. We've got 6. So we had 23% of the cohort achieved grade 5, which again I think is very, very positive. And that's of the 6 that were on a GCSE pathway. So I think the results here in terms of the looked after children are very positive, and will compare very well in terms of the kind of national averages, etc. Although making those comparisons is not really kind of valid. You'll see at Key Stage 5, we had 28 people at the end of Key Stage 5. 7 of them are supported by an EHC, and 8 were unaccompanied asylum-seeking children. So you see on the results that there are really quite wide varieties of different kind of performances there, and different types of pathways and things that the young people were involved in. So 2 were in A levels, 4 were in BTEC level 3. Number in ESOL pathways, which is English as an additional language, or English courses. Level 1 vocational pathways, supported internships, etc. As you can see, there's a really strong kind of performance there in terms of the positivity exists. And then we've got 5 students who graduated from university in degrees such as law, psychology, marketing and filmmaking. We've got 11 young people who are progressing into their first year of university, and this means that in total we'll have 30 care experienced young people attending university, which again I think is a really positive experience. I'm fairly conscious that I've probably not done justice to all of the work that the virtual school does in terms of the results, etc. Is there anything else kind of specifically you wanted to add?
Thank you, Peter. No, I think we went through it last time in some detail, so I don't think we need to redo that, and you did a lovely captive bit about it tonight, so thank you very much.
Yeah, I was very conscious when I was doing graphs and tables that this doesn't lend itself to that at all, but thank you. So then the final kind of table to talk about is just our Ofsted performance. As you can see, over the entire of 22-23, we've managed to maintain 100% of our schools being good or outstanding, which is something that obviously we should be very proud of and hope continues very much into the future. I think that probably covers all of the things I wanted to say.
Brilliant. Thank you so much, Peter. And you're absolutely right to highlight that about these good or outstanding status, and also brilliant, really wonderful to hear about the number of care leavers going on to university. So that's incredibly positive. Any other final points? Just mindful of time, so unless it's something absolutely burning, I might move us on. So Peter, thank you so much, and just wanted to check with everyone that we can note the report details, and happy to kind of formally note. I recognise it feels a bit excessive, but okay, I'm going to decide it's formally noted. Good. Lovely. Okay, thank you so much. So we're moving on now to item 5, children missing education and elective home education. Very interesting topic. So thank you very much, Liz Spearman, for joining us, who is head of ACE and School of Missions. And perhaps, Elizabeth, you could perhaps start by busting the acronym festival that is children and young people, and explain a bit about what your job title and your role entails.
Of course. Okay, first of all, thank you very much for having me. So I'm Elizabeth Spearman. I'm the head of 2 teams. The ACE school admissions, I think, is fairly self-explanatory and doesn't lend itself to acronyms, but the ACE team, it's so many responsibilities that's why we put it in an acronym. Attendance is the first bit, but we deal with the statutory aspects. So things like, I was interested in some of the questions being asked earlier about the effectiveness of initiatives and things. We deal with things like prosecutions, penalty notices, the hard end, as it were. We've got excellent support for children in terms of engaging with our early help service to try and prevent them becoming cases that need to proceed to court, and there's a lot of work that's done by them. But if that doesn't work, schools can access us directly and go for a penalty notice if a family don't want to have support, or if they're And talking earlier on, one of your colleagues asked a question about how do we measure effectiveness. We just recently did a bit of analysis on penalty notices served since September, and although they're a pretty vile initiative and we don't want to increase them, we want children in school, they do work as a very good deterrent. And of all the children we served a penalty notice on since September, every single one of them has got better attendance than when we served it. Every single one, which is a pretty stark reality that unfortunately sometimes the carrots may not work and sticks might do, basically. But in any case, so attendance is the first bit, but only the statutory bit. The C stands for child employment and children in entertainment, which is the licensing of children who are involved in stage productions and modelling and things like that in the borough, and also the inspections of venues where that is happening. And the E stands for elective home education and children missing education. And we also cover permanent exclusions. So we're the team that does the referrals that Peter was referring on to between when a young person is permanently excluded from school, ensuring that they do get an offer of alternative provision within that 6-day target. And we're pretty great. We work with them very well. And we've got a dedicated officer who makes sure that happens. Okay, so that's what ACE stands for. Attendance,
thank you so much.
child employment,
it's very
and
comprehensive and very useful. Excellent.
Now,
thank you. Please. Over to you.
Oh, okay. I'm not sure how long I've got now because I can talk forever about home education and children missing education.
Something between me capping your time and forever. Yeah, I'll leave it at your discretion. It's not capped exactly.
Right.
Maybe you can read the facial expressions of your tab at the top.
If everyone's going to sleep at this time of night, that's fine. I think it is something I'm very enthusiastic about. I think the first thing that's really important to be very clear about what those two terms mean. EHE, which is the acronym, I have spelled it out in full in the report, and I hope people might have glanced at the report, stands for electively home educated. And that means the families themselves, the parents or carers, have just chosen to educate their children at home. It doesn't include children where the local authority has put in a tutor at home. That sometimes happens with a child with a special needs plan. It sometimes happens for social care reasons. It's very rare, but these are definitely the children that parents have elected to home educate. That's what EHE stands for. CME is children missing education, not being confused with non-attenders. Non-attenders are people who've got a place and are not using it for whatever reason, but they have an allocated provision, they're just not accessing it. And obviously that is dealt with and supported by, I say, colleagues in early help and social care and us if it gets to the statutory end. But CME is children without any provision. Okay, now I've gone through in the report, and I don't want to be repetitive because some of it's quite dry and a lot of you might have heard it before. The local authority has very, very clear statutory responsibilities to ensure every child resident in the borough is in receipt of a suitable education. Suitable is never defined in law, but that's the premise. And parents don't have to do that via school, although the majority do send their children to school. That's what they choose to do to fulfill that responsibility. Any parent is allowed to home educate. And we see some fantastic examples of home education in our borough, really, really imaginative ones, very inspiring ones. And it can be a great success without a shadow of a doubt. But if you sort of caveat that with the fact that any family can choose to do it and any carer can choose to do it, and they don't have to have any I'm not saying you have to be a qualified teacher to do a fantastic provision, but they don't have to be literate. They can be children who are on the child protection register. They can be children with a child protection plan. I mean, they can be, there's a whole range of people who might choose to home educate, and we're wrestling with the parents' right to do that and the ability to support them and help them do it properly, but also a very unhelpful part of guidance that says that nobody has to tell the local authority they're home educating. They're under no obligation to tell us, and once we know about it, they don't have to cooperate and meet with us. So on the one hand, the law says we have to be sure every child's having an education, and on the other hand, it says, but we don't have to see a child. So we, some years ago, grasped the nettle and said, look, this is a nonsense. We can't be sure a child's in receipt of an education if we don't see them. So that's a very, very basic principle of our home education policies and procedures, is that we expect to see every child who's home educated. And that does cause some tensions. Not many, in fairness. Most parents are prepared to meet. They might not welcome it, but they are prepared to meet with us. In any case, I'm diverting a little bit. I'm going to try and stick to the format of the report. Otherwise, I'll go off piste quite a bit. I think So with home education, I mean, I'll do them in two different bits. Home education is the bigger cohort. I've got some statistics in there, but if we talk about children missing education, we've always got a very, very low number, which is fortunate. These are children without any provision. One of the advantages of my team's managing, I also manage school admissions. We're in a lucky position if we've got, some capacity in our schools in the borough. We can usually find a place. We've got a very, very good fair access panel process with, if all our schools happen to be full in a particular year group, usually in secondary schools, the panel meets twice a term and we ensure every child is placed. The decisions of that, and I was going to say earlier on, I was going to interrupt Peter, but I didn't dare. The reason I think our head teachers, our secondary head teachers meetings are so well attended, the fair access panel is the first part of that meeting, and if a head isn't there, they have the decisions of the meeting are binding and they will take the child. So I think they all come to make sure that they know who they're getting, basically. So anyone who is without any provision, if we can't get through in the ordinary admissions process, they go to the Fair Acts panel. We have a target to place everyone within 12 weeks. It's normally within 10 days. When we have a 12-week target, so we make sure we've got a fair access panel within that. But it's very, very quick, our placements. I mean, I think at the moment we've got 4 children who are without provision. So that's how low the numbers are. They obviously rise. I mean, if you look at the data later on in the report, we did have a peak in CME when we had all our very welcome new arrivals from, first of all, Afghanistan and then the Ukraine. So you get bumps and troughs, as it were, and you often will get any sort of transition time for children. You often get a bit of a peak in CME because some parents are dissatisfied with the school place they've been offered and are hanging out. They think if they accept what they've been offered, they won't be treated so favourably on a waiting list, which isn't true. But so, you do get little peaks, and at any given time, our school admissions staff who placed within 10 days might have, let's say an additional 10 children who are literally in process, but they go through so quickly that it's almost, you need a net to catch them. That, at any given time, there's only probably less than 10 children who are without provision for any length of time and need to go through that process. Going back to EHE, again, if you look at the data, we've seen this is in line with the national picture. Before the pandemic, I'm not going to look at my data because I'll rummage around with papers, but I think we had 80 plus children who were home educated. The height of the pandemic, we went up to having 200, just under 200, and we're now sort of coasting along at about 130. So that's significantly more than pre-pandemic, and that is a concern for us. But we can't, there's lots of conjectures about why that happened. I think a lot of parents were expected to home educate or expected to have their children at home being educated and quite liked it and stuck with it. I think there are a lot of things that we've looked into to do with why people choose to do it. I think those reasons, the child who's maybe a little bit vulnerable was not particularly enthusiastic about school. Now they had 2 years at home. They're definitely not going back now. We've had different changes in behaviours, but I think the education landscape has changed with the pandemic, and we're very keen not to discourage people from home educating because it is their legal right, but to make sure parents are doing it for the right, if there is a right reason, the sensible reasons. It's sort of proactive rather than reactive. If a parent's had an argument with a head teacher or a disagreement with the school, we'd advocate, try and work it out. Don't home educate on a whim, think about maybe transferring to another school, but because home education is a pretty big commitment. I mean, I've brought up 2 children and I can't imagine anything worse than having them at home all the time, trying to educate them as well as being a parent. It's quite a tall order. So I'm trying to think of any other things I can pull out. Some of our tensions are to do with the DfE guidance is very weak. The law, if implemented appropriately, is serviceable, but the DfE guidance is very fence-sitting, and we often get home education families who've read that and believe that the guidance says we don't have to have anything to do with them, which is actually not what it says. It says that we have to make our own policies and procedures, and they've got to be within the law, which ours are. Our policies and procedures actually, have been fortunately recognised by other boroughs and adopted by other places, and they are quite robust and they are quite firm, and we do take quite a firm stance, but that's the way the DfE is going in any case, so we're just a little bit ahead of the curve there, so which is good. We very rarely have families who completely refuse to cooperate with us, and I'm afraid if they do and we haven't got any reasonable we can't really, apart from just not wanting to cooperate, and that is a matter of principle, we do offer them the opportunity to provide us with endorsements if there's anyone tutoring the children or they've got an education professional who can endorse what they're doing at home, because we're of the view, sort of a written statement of what a parent's planning to do and their intentions and their timetable isn't actually any proof of what's being done. Does that make sense? Writing up that I'm going to treat history on a Thursday and we're going to go to a museum on Friday. There's no way we can judge, or judge is a nasty word to use, there's no way we can tell if that's having a positive impact on the child. So we are very keen to always meet with the child and the parents. It doesn't have to be in their home. We've got a dedicated home education advisor who sees people in cafes and libraries, on park benches. She's very flexible and she'll go anywhere to make sure she sees a child, sees some of their work, and has some sort of interaction with the young person about their home education experience and what impact it's having on them. And it's frequently very positive and sometimes not. If it isn't, and we're concerned, and we deem the education is not suitable, remembering there's no definition of suitable, we will tell the family, we'll give them advice and we'll say we need to change things here, maybe encourage them back into school or try and help their home education programme. If they don't cooperate or it doesn't improve, we will initiate legal action. And funnily enough, usually the initiating of it means you don't have to ever go to court. The family actually tend to then cooperate a little bit more, make a bit more, or return their child to school. So whenever I talk about court, it always sounds like I'm obsessed with legal action. I think we ought to be avoiding legal action wherever possible, but be prepared to use it when it's necessary. And I think often being prepared to use it is what means you don't have to use it, if that makes sense. I think it serves a purpose. I'm trying to think. I'd say I can talk forever about home education. Well,
I think you've sparked through this very interesting topic some questions. So perhaps we take it thematically and you embellish where you want to, Elizabeth, if that's okay. So I think the first to have hand up was Councillor Richardson.
I can't hear anything.
Sorry, I've just had an interruption there. That's the trouble with a meeting at home.
Yes.
It sounds like you have a great, really nuanced, sensitive and pragmatic approach to the service. I want to ask a specific question, which I hope it's not going to be too detailed, but I just did want I think it would be interesting to know about the pathway. I was down in White City at a Somali network group for autistic mums, mums with children with autism. And language, they needed a translator. A lot of English was a problem with quite a few of them. And one of the mums said she was home educating. And a theme at the whole meeting was how schools interpreted their children's behaviour, or the autistic children's behaviour. They felt they were being criticised. They didn't speak English as a first language, and they didn't know how to respond. So this mum had just taken the child away, and afterwards one of her friends came, and I said, well, that was good, and was quite positive. One of the friends said, well, she's really not managing to do anything at all. And I didn't know who I should put her in touch with to speak with, and if you had access to interpreters. And really was it the losses know how to interfere and how to help. So I think it might be quite useful to know the pathway of the point of contact.
Gladly. Okay, first of all, if a child's actually got an EHCP, an Education, Health and Care Plan, we don't do the assessments in our team. We don't do the visits in our team. That's done, but that's sort of coordinated by our colleagues in the SEND section, special needs section. It'll usually be done, the assessment will usually be done by either an educational psychologist or maybe a member of the Inspire team who's a specialist in the presenting issue the child has got. I mean, our home education advisor is she used to do them all. She's a very experienced teacher, but she's a mainstream. She's done secondary and primary just by chance, so that's her background. So that we've got, I think, 13 children at the moment who have got a plan, who are being home educated, and they're supported through that service. Okay, if a young person's got identified needs but hasn't gone through the whole HCP process, we will do the work with them. Yes, we use interpreters. I'm very big on, I mean, a lot of our information is translated into different languages. We haven't done the EHE stuff in different languages, but we will always use an interpreter. And it's one of the things at the beginning we find out from families if they would like that, if they'd like an interpreter to be involved. And we do try and unfortunately, like everything else, when you're short of funds, you have to sort of think pragmatically about where to spend money. And the policy, the EHE policy, is a weighty document. But I mean, I think we've done some leaflets for parents, in fact, on school admissions, and we've got that translated into, I think, 6 community languages, which are all available online. And I'd love to build up a bank of information in other community languages about other areas of the service, but that's a project for when the budget allows, as it were. But definitely we'll use interpreters, and definitely will support anyone. And our home education advisor is vastly experienced, and she's very used to dealing with people from a lot of different backgrounds and cultures, and with different attitudes to learning and different experiences of school. But if they've got a plan, it's go to our send section. If they haven't got a plan, you can come directly to me.
Oh, excellent. I shall go and find out then. Who would be the person in the send section?
Perhaps we might take this one offline, just and you email
yes.
directly.
All right, thank you very much. That's great.
Thank you. And we'll move to Councillor Asal Khan.
Hi, thank you, Elizabeth, for that. The passion that you have for this is amazing. My question is there a framework from DFE that puts down at least some guidance or minimum standards or requirements of a certain percentage of the basic national curriculum that should be taught, even if they're being homeschooled? And how are these pupils ever assessed? And is there some special measures or special considerations like we have for SEND pupils when we're assessing them? Is any of that in place? Is there a framework that kind of accepts that, yes, there will always be some people who might choose to do home education, but at the end of the day, the state has a responsibility towards all children? And is there a minimum requirement, or is there a framework that even when you're schooling home, that should be followed?
The short answer is no. It's something we've been asking for a long time. They say that the law basically says that the education has to be suitable, not defined. But it's very, very clear in the DFE guidance, people don't have to follow the national curriculum. They don't have to be tested. They don't do SATs. They don't have to do GCSEs. They don't have to do any formal. They don't have to follow the national curriculum at all. We put in our guidance that's homemade. This is our suggestion. We'd like to see a broad and balanced curriculum. We'd like to see the whole concept of a child being equipped to take their place in society. But they're all quite nebulous concepts. And if a family is and remember, families don't even have to meet with us at the moment. So how can you can't put in standards you expect them to meet if you don't even expect them to meet with the law at the moment. Is a complete ass in this area. Sorry. It's very frustrating because we have a responsibility to ensure that these young people are being educated, but we have no right to either see them, and there's no expectation on them to follow any sort of curriculum. So we're weaving a path the whole way between balancing this. We're quite robust about it. We do expect, and we have guidance, homegrown guidance, that says we would expect a child to be, normally to be covering these areas. And there's lots of different ways you can teach history or English or mathematics, but we would expect some evidence of some of these science. We have an expectation. But if a family says, well, I'm not doing it, I don't think that is important. I want them to be, free spirits and do lots of pottery and painting and dance and spin. We can't say, we've got to tread very carefully. We would say that wasn't a suitable education, but there's no definition. So it's the cases we have, and we haven't been to court for a number of years, but the cases we have ever ended up, we've always won. So we're quite clear on what we're doing, but it's quite hard to put it in writing or make it specific because it's legally that there is no definition of this suitability. That's the problem, and there's total lack of expectation that people, I'm not saying tests are the best way to do anything, but when Jan, who does our home education visits, she uses a number of different ways to try and interact with the family to see if there is progress being made, to see how broad the subject. And some families do it very traditionally and it's very easy to do. Some families do a fantastic job, but it's not very unconventional, and she has to dig around a bit more. And she is very skilled at it, but it's not made easy by the guidance at the moment. And that's why a lot of boroughs do nothing about it, because they're quite entitled to do nothing about it. Just take the parents' word for it. That is an option.
If I may ask a follow-up question.
Please do.
So one is, what happens when you do win at court? And two is, the state has mandated, that every child be taught the PHSEE at least in schools, the, physical health and all those bits. But how is it possible to teach students or pupils that if they're never going to be at school? Now that bit is mandated for every school to teach.
But for schools to teach, as is the national curriculum, but not for people who home educate. That's the conundrum.
Well, how can we ensure that these pupils will be able to survive in society and are prepared?
I totally share your concerns. It's something I've been campaigning about for nigh on 30 years. I think it's we're slowly edging to, but we've got to have a balance between you don't want to become punitive and presume everyone who's home educated is doing a terrible job, but on the other hand, some minimum standards, a minimum idea of a curriculum and how it's delivered. But I think the most key thing we need to try and ensure is that we do have a right or an expectation that education staff will meet regularly with home education families. We say once a year at the moment, and families object to that. Some boroughs don't even do that. They don't meet with families at all, because in law, parents say, we haven't got any evidence I'm not educating my child. Why are you insisting on seeing them?
So there's no minimum literacy or numeracy standards whatsoever?
Nope.
No. So if you opt out from the national curriculum, you opt out from everything. That's your choice as a parent, and you're allowed to do that.
Absolutely. Shocking, isn't it?
Just had a brief, I think this is lit up the switchboard, as it were, in terms of questions. And I fully understand the complexity of the principles underpinning the kind of vagueness from DfE, as in, I don't sympathise with them necessarily, but I understand the realm you're operating in, that it's unknown unknowns potentially. And I wondered, of the information that you can capture, sensitive, Liz, to what you described, in not sort of either obliged or empowered necessarily in legislation or policy to do so, but if there were certain metrics that we deem, let's start with education outcomes. I'm not saying that exam results are the be all and end all, but do you have comparative data that perhaps could be used to just plainly lay down outcomes for parents? And I also wondered, and recognise these are massive questions, the other one is, if there are things that are inhibiting people or feeling that there's, through a limited options, they have to kind of school educate, do you feel there are certain subjects where actually there are, whether it be by councils or other forces, could mitigate people feeling that they must default to home education rather than feel that they could send their children to school in a very complex environment you're working in with different situations?
The first thing is that the first 3 months of somebody home educating, a lot of home educating families say that they don't want anything to do with anyone in those first 3 months because they're deschooling their children and they're setting up their programs. We respect that. But often in that window, we've got another officer who's the Children Missing Education and EHE pending officer, believe it or not. And she works with those families and she gets a number of them back into school. A lot of it's to do with mediating disagreements with the school and actually unpicking if the family really do want to do this, which is absolutely fine and we respect that, or if they're doing it as a reaction to a poor experience in a school or a perceived negativity. So that's the first thing we do. Once they're committed to it, we are pretty firm that we will meet with them. And we have got, we've got a lot of guidance online, written, some of it in a very, hopefully, parent-friendly way, some of it more professional. We do have a checklist of things we'd expect from a home educating family. And we couch it as sort of guidance things you might want to consider rather than, prescriptive, this is what you must do, because that is like a red rag to a bull. We say this is the sort of things that a lot of home education families do. This is what your child might learn if they were in a school. So you might want to consider covering some of these subjects, but they're under no obligation to do it. And if they say, no, I don't want to consider that, I want to do something completely alternative, they're entitled to. One of the things that, as a community, I say there are a lot of very, very hardworking, reasonable, experts at home education who do very well at it without a shadow of a doubt. But one of our challenges is always they don't want to communicate. So gathering information and data and measuring is virtually impossible. You know, we could most probably do some small, we've done case studies in the past, and we've had some lovely stories post home education of children going on to achieve great things, but they're under no obligation, as I say, to tell us they're doing it in the first. But there are children in the borough, I can put my money on it, there are children in Hammersmith and Fulham being home educated who we don't know about. No way of knowing about them. If they've never been into school and they've gone straight into home education from, you know, birth, from nursery, or not nursery, from, you know, they never went to nursery, there'll be children in the borough we don't know about. That's the concern for me.
Yeah. Interesting. Okay, I'm going to move through the questions and try and do it fairly equitably so people can try and condense it down to pithy, you know, the core question you want to ask, rather than multiple, although do say if there's something pressing. Nandini.
Can parents ask for EOTAS funding instead, EOTAS funding instead of saying, I want to home educate? Can they apply for EOTAS funding? How easy is that?
It's not something we do. It's not something that Hammersmith and Fulham do. We basically say if you home educate, you're taking our money goes into, you know, supporting our schools and supporting families there. If you choose to, rather like if you choose to go to a private school, you don't get any funding from the local authority.
No, not a private school. It's education other than.
Well, I'll jump in there, Nandi. So so the education otherwise at school. So we do, but if a young person does have an EHCP, we have a small number of young people where we've agreed an EOTAS package.
Sorry,
so it
we wouldn't consider them home educated.
It doesn't sit within Liz's team. Right. It doesn't define as home educated. It's classified as something different.
Okay, fine. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Okay. Councillor Sanderson, did you still want to come in, or okay, all good. Right. I'm going to go next to Nadia, just to give people the floor who haven't had it.
Oh, hello. Just wondered, I mean, I'm terribly concerned, and I'm sure you'll share this concern, but what Elizabeth said is worrying me tremendously, because if we don't know that there are children homeschooled, we also don't have any ability to carry out any safeguarding checks. So what can the borough do in terms of ensuring that safeguarding practices and expectations are actually met if parents are resisting inspections or visits from the authority?
Right. I think the first thing we've got to be really clear about, the fact that someone's home education doesn't mean that they're more likely to be abused. You know, without a shadow of a doubt. I think I think it's a very easy leap to make, and I think that's very I'm not saying you're being unfair, but I think it's a presumption. We always worry about children who are home educated, and if the reason is because sometimes people are pulled out of school because the school made a report, an allegation of a child protection concern, and that's why they're removed from school. That's been the trigger for the relationship breaking down, and that obviously is a concern. And we work closely with our colleagues in social care on the children we know about who maybe have a social worker. We work closely with them to make sure they're aware that they have to maybe have more regular contact. It's the ones we don't know what we don't know. That's the problem. And until the legislation has changed, and there has been talk of this, you know, intermittently, and then there's usually some other major crisis at the centre which bumps it off the political agenda. But until there is an obligation for families to register with the local authority as home educated, but a lot of them choose not to do it. They won't do it. You know, they're not obliged to, and they hang on to that right. They don't have to tell us. But what we have done in a more sort of proactive way is be very clear about, we talk to a lot of our colleagues. We've done, over the years, we've done sessions with housing colleagues, with the police, with all sorts of different people in the community. If you've come with medical profession, with GPs, we did a lot of work with GPs a while back. If you come across anyone who you're not clear whether they're at school or they mention their homeschooling, do let us know. And then we can check out if we already know them. And our introductory letter to families is not threatening or not nasty. It's, you know, welcome to home education and we're here to help. It's very much, and it gives them information, some ideas of things they, you know what I mean? We try and be as non-intrusive as possible, but until they change the regulations, and we have a, you know, an obligation on families to tell us if they're home educating, we're not, you know, we're not really going to see much change there. It is a worry. I agree.
May I just, Elizabeth, I think that it's not necessarily through the prism of home education, but I think the concept that's been introduced is that there are children potentially living in the borough who we aren't aware of through statutory. I mean, before I even finish the question, would someone like to come in and just clarify what I think was being asked, which isn't necessarily criticism at all?
The key point, yeah. So the key point, obviously, is they don't have to register with the education system, but the likelihood is that they have registered with health or one of the other services. Obviously, there's things that we could potentially pick up through other kind of key pieces of intel. For example, looking at how we can support these families through things like family hubs, etc., etc. So it is something that obviously obviously as Liz has mentioned, in terms of housing and the police, we share the information as widely as possible and look to kind of get to our positions where our intel is as strong as it can be.
And we do put a lot of effort into that. But I think you remember not so long ago, we had a family who were living on a boat, and every time we got anywhere near them, they moved the boat to another borough in their boat, and they weren't registered with the doctor. They had they lived off grid basically and if a family doesn't want to be found, I'm afraid, you know, whatever publicity we do until it's actually made a little bit more forceful, I think we'll do what we can. That's all we can do at the moment, and we do a lot better than a lot of other boroughs. I'm proud of that, because we do work well together with colleagues in other sections and other services.
Thank you very much.
I think it's important to stress that rather than individual cases that we have a very strong provision, and we're quite confident in everything that we do.
And we do also, and we've got very good relations. If a child's ever been in school and comes off roller to school, we're really watertight on that. They have to tell us, and there's proper processes for that. And I think that's we work very well with our schools on that. The ones who've been in school, I'm not worried about, because when they come out, we have a process for them. It's the ones that, and we don't know how many there are, but we do the best we can, and it's pretty good in our borough, comparatively good.
Understood. Thank you. I'm going to, I recognise this is a slightly unconventional order. I'm going to go to Councillor Sanderson because I sense that will be thematic to this point. And then I think I've been very neglectful of you, Councillor Ume, if you did still have a question, although I can't see a hand up anymore. So do pop the hand up if you still wanted to ask. I'll first go to Councillor Sanderson.
Thank you very much, Sharon. I'm very, very conscious of time, because although I am delighted that we spent so much time on this item, because it's one of my favourite topics and most intriguing topics that we have to deal with, I'm conscious we've got other things on the agenda. But just to say, I mean, it's really notable that Liz has such encyclopedic knowledge of all the different families who pass through the home education service or team to work with, because as she says, there are lots and lots of local authorities who don't engage with this quite thorny topic at all, and Hammersmith and Fulham have been really at the forefront of pushing for better access, better understanding of what's happening with different families across the borough. And we know that in lots of cases they will be doing an absolutely brilliant job, but unfortunately the legislation is at the moment, it just is a bit more thorny than we'd like it to be. And I think in various other countries where it's not illegal, there are much tighter legislation around home education than there is here. So I know it was obviously on the schools bill that was pulled last year. We're hoping there will be more forceful legislation coming through with provision for us having a register. But as Liz says, we are really doing the very best we can in quite a weak legislative area, but we have got a service in Hammersmith and Fulham. So just to try and be as reassuring as possible about that.
Understood. I think it's the overall picture that's being questioned rather than borough level provision. I'm just going to continue the theme about looking at the clock, just because we have another 2 items. Councillor Sakana, I didn't know if that was an old. I know he's gone down. Perfect. And Councillor Ume, did you want to? Have I neglected a question from probably about half an hour ago now that you wanted to come in with?
Okay. I think my question has been asked, so it's fine. Thank you.
Okay, apologies. Sorry that I had quite the queue at one point, so sorry, really sorry I didn't come to you. Okay, so I think worth us noting that this is an area of fascination we will definitely revisit. We could even potentially have a session to understand offline, but to be discussed. Please do send in kind of feedback or follow up to me. But I'll pause this. I will pause this now. So I am going to move on to our next item on private fostering.
Can I just end with one very quick thing?
Sorry, of course, Liz, do sum up.
I'm beyond my way. Very, very quickly. It's nice to have everyone's support. We are reintroducing our annual home education families event, which has been a great success in the past because we actually get people who are a bit mistrustful of the local authority to come along, and we took everyone to the Lyric Theatre one time. We got free tickets there. We've taken up to Ravenscourt Park Garden, the greenhouses there, and we're going to have another one of those this summer, and that always has quite a good impact on you have to keep everything active with this. You have to keep changing our initiatives and doing different things, and so we do put a lot of effort in the engagement part of it, and we will continue to do so. So I will leave you now, and thank you for all your time and for listening.
No, thank you for coming and for being so encyclopedic, and for your passion as well.
And
so
always,
thank you.
Always happy to take questions outside or at any other time if anyone wants to be in touch.
Thank you so much, Liz.
If anyone comes across a home education child, let me know. Okay then, bye-bye.
Yes, we will do. Thank you so much. Okay, lovely.
Bye-bye.
Right, so sorry for being premature and wrapping up there. I will move to item 6, which is private fostering. So I'll hand over to Amena.
Thank you. So I'm going to try and share my screen. Unfortunately, I'm on leave this week, so I couldn't manage to find the PowerPoint, so I'm sharing it from the actual papers, but hopefully you can see that okay.
Good.
I'm not quite sure how I'm going to navigate it though, so bear with me. Sorry, I don't think that's it. I've just got to move you guys across my screen so I can scroll down when I need to. So I've come here this evening to talk about private fostering. Private fostering, similar to elective home education, actually is a continuous area of struggle to identify children and young people who have been privately fostered. That's also a lot to do with the way it's termed, so people don't often understand what it means by privately fostered. But the private fostering is a term used when someone who is not a parent or a close relative is looking after a child under the age of 16. So once they're 16, they are no longer, if they're with a friend or an aunt or someone not very closely related and not placed there by the local authority, we don't get involved. But under 16, we would expect to be notified and be able to provide a short assessment and advice and information. So as you can see in the slides, we provided the definition of a relative. Private foster carers become the primary carer for a child and has authority over day-to-day decisions. So that's essentially what we're talking about, is they are permanently living there. The private foster carer is making all of the day-to-day decisions. They don't have parental responsibility, but they are exercising decisions in the same way. So if the child is accommodated by the local authority, either by way of an order or under Section 20, which is an informal agreement between us and the person with parental responsibility, that's not considered to be private fostering. So hopefully that's clear. It is in the slides for you. So common situations in which children are privately fostered are when parents of families are overseas, children with parents working or studying in the UK, asylum seekers and refugees, trafficked children, local children living apart from their families, adolescents and teenagers, children attending language schools, children at independent boarding schools who do not return home for the holidays, and children brought in from abroad with a view to adoption. So whilst there is legislation that came from the Layman report after the horrific death of Victoria Colombier, so the Children Act 2004 set out to raise awareness to provide us with the ability as a local authority to assess the suitability of those arrangements. We were required to appoint a private fostering officer, which we do have. We have a qualified social worker who deals with all private fostering referrals. And our local safeguarding children's partnership, so our safeguarding board, do oversee those arrangements, and we are required to report to the board on those. Introduce a national minimum standard for private fostering and to enhance the inspection regime. So when we are inspected, Ofsted do pay close attention to privately fostered children that we may be aware of. In London, there are very few children that are identified as privately fostered, and it is a unique challenge that we're all struggling with to try and improve the understanding and to receive those referrals in. So our legal duties, birth parents, private foster carers and persons who are arranging for a child to be privately fostered are required by law to notify the local authority. Unfortunately, there is nothing that's been enforced around that. There's very little sort of legal cases that have been taken that would help us to ensure that people really understand those responsibilities. So if any of you and anyone listening in know someone in a personal or professional capacity who is privately fostering or is about to, you should encourage them to notify Children's Services through the front door, through our ICAT team. And if they are not able to do so, then you should take responsibility of notifying us as the local authority or the local authority within which they reside. We're required, once we're notified, to carry out an assessment to monitor the arrangement. A social worker will visit the home, speak to the carer and the child to ensure the child is safe, carry out background checks and make sure support is being provided. If the child is not yet in the arrangement, that's called a Regulation 4 visit. And if the child is already in the arrangement, this is called a Regulation 7 visit. That doesn't really make a lot of difference. The important thing is that for us to be notified and to get in and to start doing those assessments. Support for private foster carers may include advice on benefits and possible funding for some essential items, parenting support and advice, making them aware of the local services, connecting them in with the family hubs, making sure the children are in school, all of those sorts of things, and help in bringing families in crisis back together. So if that separation has happened due to crisis or events within the family, we can look to provide them support so that the children can safely go home. And we also can tap them into any local training, so they can access the virtual school training that we offer, and they can also access the training that we have through the LSCP. So for best practice, staff must have detailed training on private fostering and clear guidance on procedures and pathways for referrals, so that we're very clear when we have those arrangements referred, that we know what to do. But also that professionals within our partnership, so for example, GPs, schools, health visitors, people that might come in contact with the children and might understand that they are in a private fostering arrangement, would know how to identify them, hospitals, those sorts of things. So there is training available for the partnership. A specialist and knowledgeable named worker, which we have. Currently that worker sits within our ICAT team, so our front door where the referrals come in. We are seeking to change those arrangements. Sorry, someone's just flashed up my screen. We are seeking to change those arrangements. We think that this role will be best placed within our fostering service, because it means that we will have more skills and expertise around those types of assessments within that service. So we won't have a kind of if one person's off, we'll be sharing those expertise. But also we have a marketing aspect to fostering in terms of our recruitment and advice and training, and we think that would be best placed to help us make sure that we maximise all the opportunities to make the local community aware of how to identify these children and to refer them in. So raising and maintaining high levels of staff awareness of private fostering so they are equipped to identify and notify, building relationships with groups of practitioners likely to come into contact with these children, e.g. language schools, churches and schools and all of the other people that I've mentioned. So the challenges we have, the duty to notify local authorities that a child has been privately fostered is not well understood, partly through ignorance or reluctance on the parts of the carers or parents to bring such arrangements to the attention of the authorities. There may be some fear around that. There's also not really much incentive for them. It doesn't, what are they going to get from making us aware of those arrangements? Agencies are often unclear as to whether they have a legal obligation to notify authorities of private fostering arrangements, and again, perceive no advantage in referring families. So that's something that we continue to do every year to make sure that the professionals in our area really do understand their legal obligation and actually the support that we can provide to those families. Lack of awareness or confusion as to what constitutes a private fostering arrangement often confused between our kinship, which is where the local authority is involved in agreeing with the parents and carers that the children should be cared for by relatives or people that are within their network that they have quite a secure relationship with, and they will often be secured through court arrangements as well. Concerns about confidentiality. So, we often have issues around, should we be sharing information? Is there an issue around GDPR? That's all part of our training that we offer, because it was reported to us that some professionals regarded notifying the local authority of an actual potential private fostering arrangement as a breach of parent confidentiality in instances where they had no child protection concerns. And as we've said, there is a legislative obligation to report when you are aware of these arrangements. The unlikelihood of those trafficking or abusing children to notify. So obviously we have that issue around, if you are seeking those arrangements to enable you to traffic or abuse a child, you are very unlikely to report yourself and notify us yourself, but you're also probably going to be not very open with any of the other professionals you come into contact with. So our local context, there are a small number of children identified as in private fostering arrangements in Hammersmith and Fulham, and that's not unlike other London boroughs. We are currently supporting 4 children in private fostering arrangements, with another due to start a planned arrangement later this month. We started 23-24 with 2 private fostering arrangements, so we've doubled our numbers, but you can see they're still extremely low. Year to date, we received 6 referrals, one of which did not progress and 2 have subsequently being closed. So they may close for a variety of reasons, but we've been in and assessed those arrangements. We have a designated private fostering social worker, and as I've said, we're looking to transfer that to make sure that those skills are shared better, and they are required to undertake an initial visit within 7 working days of us being notified. And private assessment is triggered once the child has been in placement for 28 days. So that should, our 7-day assessment should take place within the first month of that child being in that arrangement. So here we've got all of the things that we are doing to support and raise awareness. So social workers in our service have access to clear policies on TRIACs, and our TRIACs documents are now available in an app for our social workers. So TRIACs, you used to just click on a link on the website, but now we've got this really dynamic app that they can have on their desktop and on their phone, and they can access all of the practice guidance for a variety of things, but including private fostering at the tip of their fingers. There is a link with information on both the H&F website and the LSCP website under hot topic issues, so available for partners, for the local community and for our workforce as well. We have private fostering leaflets and posters translated into multiple languages and has been distributed by the private fostering social worker to local services such as GPs and health centres. We have training on private fostering is included as part of the induction for all social workers in our initial consultation and advice team. So that means if they went out to a family, because it might be that we had a family referred with their birth children or children legally able to stay with them, and we might discover that they've got a child that isn't related to them that might be a private fostering arrangement. So we like to make sure that our social workers are aware how to identify that. The Safeguarding Education Manager provides regular training to schools and is available for ad hoc consultation and advice. And the designated private fostering social worker has also presented to the designated Safeguarding Leads network. So, that information is widely spread within our schools estate. So our continuous improvement, so we will constantly have a rolling programme to try and improve identification for these children. So the private fostering social worker will regularly redistribute the leaflets to health centres, schools, other community centres to raise awareness. But that's one of the things that we think by placing it in our fostering team and using the marketing skills we've got in there, we might want to do that in a different way and to use maybe some social media and think about it differently than, kind of old-fashioned sort of posters. Private fostering information will be included in the LBHF internal newsletter every 6 months. We have a school zone that our school estate can access, so information is on there. We take the information to the GP forum that meets regularly and their newsletter, A&E newsletter, and I don't actually know what the director for SPCHN stands for, so forgive me. Jackie might know. I should have checked that in my slides, but if Jackie doesn't know, I will be able to email that to you all with the minutes. Discussions are taking place with the Mosaic team to help us create a more robust system. So that's our case management operating system, where we have all of the details of all of the children that are referred, and we have specific steps and forms that help us kind of make sure that all of the information for children is in the same place, and that also that we can report out of that. So by putting additional steps onto Mosaic, it will allow us to monitor and record activity around private fostering arrangements better. That said, we only have 4, so they're quite easy to keep track of. We will utilise children's health education, social care, and health and wellbeing boards, together with a new relationship with the Integrated Children's Board, to continuously promote our private fostering. We will explore whether changes can be made to the school admissions form. So this is really important to us, but a tricky and sticky issue. So what we want to do is to be able to, on the school admissions form, it be clear there that you can tick if a child is in a private fostering arrangement. But we think that probably needs a pan-London approach, because obviously schools take children from a number of authorities. So my reason for bringing this here is to make sure that you're all aware, so that you have oversight, so that you can challenge our performance around that, but also so that you might be able to share this information within your networks or contacts, and you might actually have people that come to see you in your surgeries who, when they're talking to you about the issues they might have, this might come up. So it's just to raise awareness as well. I'm happy to take any questions, and I will keep thinking about what that acronym is. Jackie knows.
Thank you very much, Amina. I just to, oh, sorry, Jackie, do come in.
I think it's probably specialist. I think it's community nursing and midwifery. I think they've just got transposed a couple of the letters.
It's specialist community public health nursing.
Which is not very helpful. Acronyms are not very helpful for me as a dyslexic, but particularly if someone puts them in the wrong order. So apologies.
Don't worry at all. Amina, I wondered if we could just ask, if I could ask a very obvious question, which is implicit but maybe not explicit in the presentation. Could you just define exactly what private fostering is?
So basically, private fostering is looking after a child that you're not related to, without any legal framework. So the local authority, the courts, there's no orders in place. It's an informal arrangement. So that's why we need to kind of assess those arrangements.
Got it. Brilliant. That's those are the 2 components. So I wanted to just, my only other question on this was, you touched on the fact that you think it needs a pan-London approach to sort of gain the information, and I wondered via which networks or groups you thought that would be most appropriately gained.
So we meet as practice leaders for London. So people that are holding my position meet, and they call it Practice Leaders for London group. So we discuss private fostering there and look at what changes we need to make there, and also through the London Safeguarding Children's Board, we can pose that as a challenge to them to think about. And they will have the children's social care practitioners and leaders, and they will also have education leaders that they can talk to and try and move that forward. But again, it's an issue around, there's legislation there, but it's not being enforced and it's not being supported in the right way.
Yeah, I see. So is this, in essence, is this, I know that you've got like a number of bills that haven't gone through. Is this sort of pending and there's general consensus, but you're actually, I'm leading the witness. How feasible do you think it is, or timeline, or what's your best guess?
I think the appetite for it probably isn't there in terms of what impact that might have. I think it was awful what happened to Victoria Climber, but that was a long time ago and was one child. And what you often see when you have a horrific event is you see these sort of quite forceful actions coming out of them, but nobody really thinks about how practicable they are. So I'm not saying it's not important. It is important. It's really important that we can help those families, and we can help those children understand what those arrangements are. But really, in terms of when we know about them and what impact that has, we haven't, in the private fostering arrangements that we've identified, it's very rare that we find any welfare concerns. Those children have generally been well cared for.
Great, thank you so much. Are there any questions on this topic? Mindful, and apologies, my misleading. The final item is actually for information. I will briefly talk to it just because I've requested the information, which is extremely interesting. But did anyone want to ask anything pressing on this, or is that all? Has it all been sated by Amanda's thorough explanation? Okay, good, excellent. Right, thank you so much, Amanda, and we will certainly note and be eyes and ears and can think about using that definition you gave, exactly how to be aware of that in a sensitive way and report it appropriately. So item number 7 was on the engagement of young people with voter registration, i.e. getting young people registered to vote ahead of upcoming elections. Now, we've got obviously mayorals in May, but I believe I'm right, and Councillor Sanderson is usually the aficionado on these sorts of things. I believe I'm right in saying that if it wasn't if it wasn't called for today, there will not be a May election at GE, a general election. I'm waiting for a nod or a correction. I'm pretty sure today was today, right?
It's not. It's well, unless something's happened that I haven't seen. We're not.
Well, no, I think that might have been a pop-up on BBC News on the phone. But just to say, I think we can now breathe easy. We're not going to have a May election. But it was still something I really wanted to look at, mainly because it's just extremely interesting and something that young people mention a lot about, being excited to vote or, worrying friends aren't voting. My niece said to me she was really hoping it wouldn't be a May election so that she could vote. Her birthday's in September, so everything crossed for Safi. But basically I'd asked for information, and we can definitely revisit it, but it's just to say that information on what we've been doing, a very thorough programme to get young people kind of empowered as champions and through a range of different means to get voter registration up among younger people. So fascinating stuff. We will have use that as a template, I'm sure, for something that users have, kind of bring in their voices for a future item. But given potentially the urgency or the changing situation, I just wanted people to be aware of it and what's being done so far. So other than that, I think we've fascinating discussions tonight, very kind of tricky and in places thorny issues. Just wanted to note the date of the next meeting is on the 24th of June. If anyone had any final points to make, then do raise hands now. But other than that, thank you so much for joining online. Robust discussion as ever, and we'll see you back in person in June. Lovely. Thank you so much. Good evening, everyone, and thank you to everyone who joined online as well. Night.
Sorry, could I just